and a very warm welcome. You're watching Middle East Now on I24 News. Our headlines this hour. An I24 News exclusive. Our Zach Anders is freshly back from Syria. He's the only journalist from an Israeli network to go inside the country, and he'll join us in just a few moments. Turkey sends a high-level delegation to Damascus as Syria's Kurds come under pressure in the north of the country. And the IDF says it now has complete air superiority over Syria. We'll go to our correspondent in the Golan Heights for the latest. While he was the first, and so far he's the only journalist from Israel to go inside Syria following the fall of the Assad regime, our Zach Anders travelled to Damascus this week as an independent journalist, where he saw for himself the aftermath of the rapid fall of Assad. He met with rebels and ordinary people. He has just made it back to our newsroom, and he'll tell us about his experience in just a moment. But first, let's take a listen to some of the people that he met along the way.
The thing that is very incredible that all people are very, very happy. In any time of the year, people are happy. For me, it's a very heart beating to be in this area and see all the people who are happy. I have been waiting for a moment like this for all of my life. Most of people's problems in Syria is Bashar al-Assad, nothing else.
I'm free. This is how I feel. I'm free. I'm literally free now. Bashar al-Assad is now out of Syria and will never come. And I want him dead, like every single Syrian in this world. Because we have suffered, and this man must die. Because he went to kill us here in Syria. Every single man in Syria have suffered his rage. So we need him killed right away. Please let this message be with all the Syrian people in here. Let the Syrian live, please.
What's next for Syria? What happens next?
Syria is going to be a great nation. We hope that, and we need it to be. We need the democracy. Let the American be with us.
Some very excited Syrians there following the fall of that decades-old brutal Assad regime. And Zach is with us back in the studio. So, Zach, you were there. You saw it all for yourself. What marked you the most?
Oh, man, the experience, I'm still processing how incredible it really was. The process of getting into the country, coming across a border where you still see the relics of Assad, and it says, "Welcome to the Free Arab," or the Syrian Arab Republic. And you cross the border, the Jordanians shut the gate behind you, and the soldiers wave and say, "Good luck." And you walk a few steps, you don't know what's about to happen. And a group of men come out with AK-47s, and within a moment, they shake your hand and they go, "Welcome to the Free Syria. It's good to have you here." And they were so happy to have outsiders coming in. I came in with actually Syrians that were coming back from abroad, and we were together. And for them, they're crying. This is an emotional moment for them. Throughout the country, we didn't meet one person. We didn't have one experience. I mean, and we're meeting people at the prison, Sidnaya prison. We're meeting people in central Damascus. We didn't meet one person that was worried about what comes next, that had any trepidation. It's like the world's greatest weight on their shoulders had been lifted, and they were 10 feet. They were hovering off the ground. Everyone. It was like, to me, I thought, man, this must have been what it was like to the first 4th of July, you know, when Americans overthrew the Brits.
Or the fall of the Berlin Wall.
Sorry about that, yeah.
No problem.
And we're sitting there, and you're feeling like constant celebration on every turn. We had 2 cars break down on us. Immediately, we had men coming out and trying to help. One of the men that came out and helped very proudly proclaimed, "I was in Assad's army 2 weeks ago." And I thought in that moment, my goodness, I'm with guys that were in the Free Syrian Army. These guys were fighting each other. They grabbed each other's hands, they hugged, they kissed, and they said, "We're going to build a new Syria together." And that's the kind of moment that I don't know if we in the international media or the international press that's inside Syria right now are doing a good enough job showing and sharing the fact that there's such incredible unity within the Syrian public in this moment. 5 decades of Assad. Lift that away from them. And that's the one person that no matter where you are in Syria, The only people that were loyal to that man were the bureaucrats that were getting paid. All of the wealth and the money that was taken from these people went to them into a small neighborhood in Damascus around the presidential palace, and they were the untouchables. And those people have now fled and gone. So you've got an entire country left just for the people of Syria.
And what did the people you spoke to have to say about their neighbours in Israel?
So that's the element to this where, as we are talking about Israel is airstriking some 300 plus sites, and we could hear them. I saw one of these Israeli airstrikes. I heard the drones almost all the time, especially when we were in the south. In one of those moments, I thought to myself, boy, being on this side of the Israeli airstrike, I really hope, I'm not near anything, or because I don't know. I'm not familiar with the area, and I don't know where some of this equipment that is being stored that is of Assad's and how powerful it is that when the moment
chemical
they hit
weapons.
it, exactly. Yeah. So there's some moments there, but one of the men I was with, I'm sure we will be friends for life. He was a great man. As we were driving past, we were talking about these Israeli strikes, and he was upset because he said, whatever you think about the equipment, that we don't need these tanks. We don't need the weapons. We're putting down our weapons because these wars are over, to him, is what he's saying. But at the same time, he was upset because he's like, Israel has no right to destroy what's ours because we paid for that. This was Assad that took our wealth and used it to go to the Russians and buy all this equipment. That was our money that we used, and now Israel's destroying it. And as he said that, we drive down the road to Damascus, and there's a tank on fire from the inside and another vehicle on fire from the inside. So the Syrians, are very, very clear that wasn't hit by an airstrike.
So you're not hopeful they'll want peace with Israel one day?
I think that they don't have any necessary ill will towards Israel at this moment, that their apparatus or their new structures are gearing up towards that, like, we have new enemies. And if anything, the only thing that they talked about that they really, truly felt as enemy number one, Hezbollah. Anytime that you spoke about Hezbollah and the atrocities that they committed against Syrians, they hate Hezbollah. They hate what Hezbollah did to them. If they had to, they would go fight Hezbollah right now.
We share that at least then. Interesting. Zach, thank you very much. Great to talk to you. Yeah. Well done. Zach Andrews there, freshly back from Syria. Well, Syria must now rebuild after more than a decade of war and sectarian conflict. The Prime Minister of the new transitional government is calling for Syrian refugees from around the world to return and has also vowed to uphold the rule of law. Our Alex Schloss has this report.
Following the fall of the Assad dynasty and the festivities that followed, Syrians are now scrambling to piece together a country fractured by over a decade of civil war and sectarian divides. Egypt, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, the UAE, Bahrain, Oman, and Italy have officially resumed the work of their diplomatic missions in Damascus, moves welcomed by the HTS-led Syrian Salvation Government, now pushing for international recognition after their successful toppling of the now-defunct regime.
What is your message to foreign countries? They might be worried about what's going to happen in the country, what your plan will be. What are your thoughts on this, and what would you like to say to these foreign countries?
Their fears are unnecessary. God willing, the country will be rebuilt. The fear was from the presence of the regime. The regime is now gone, thank God, and the country is moving towards development and reconstruction. It's going towards stability.
U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is now in Jordan to begin a tour focused on the situation in Syria. The top U.S. diplomat will hold talks with Jordan's King Abdullah before flying to Turkey for further talks. U.S. State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller said in a statement, "The Secretary will emphasize the importance of an inclusive, Syrian-led transition which respects human rights, protects civilians, and ensures humanitarian access." Meanwhile, a major backer of the ousted regime, Iran, said the country has to live with the new realities in Syria, signaling a willingness to work with the future leaders in Damascus. Iran, at the same time, blamed the U.S. and Israel for the current instability there.
There should be no doubt that what happened in Syria is the result of a joint plan between the United States and the Zionists. Yes, a neighboring government of Syria has played, is playing, and will continue to play a clear role in this matter.
As Syrian refugees hopeful for a brighter future begin their journey home, the transitional government will be faced with the daunting task of building a functional state apparatus to maintain order, revive the economy, hold to account former regime officials guilty of war crimes, mediate the clashes that persist between Kurdish forces and Turkish-backed groups in the country's northeast, and build an inclusive and stable government capable of holding the splintered nation together.
Well, with me in the studio this hour, Asher Fredman is the director for the Misgav Institute for National Security. Welcome, Asher. Good to have you with us. We're also joined by Ruth Wasserman, former member of the Knesset and research fellow, also at the Misgav Institute for Strategic Affairs. So welcome to you both. So let's talk about Syria. This new transitional government, they're putting out a very moderate face to the world. What do you make of it, both of you? Asher first.
They are indeed, and it's clear their leadership knows how to speak to the West. They've had some experience with Western media. The question is not what they're going to do on day one, because as we heard on day one, the Syrian people are not looking to go back to an atmosphere of fear, an atmosphere of coercion. On the other hand, we have to assume that these people who come from extremist Islamist backgrounds aren't going to change their spots in a day and a week. And the real fear may be that over time, we will see an encroachment or the enforcement of Sharia law and a more extreme version of Islam in Syria. We have to recall also, though, that the new leadership, Al-Julayani's people, are going to be looking for Western funding, for European funding to rebuild Syria. They're likely to get it, especially if they're welcoming back Syrian refugees. That may also impact the way they choose to govern Syria, their need for funding from the West.
And we are hearing from inside Syria, and there is a lot of unconfirmed video going around of reprisal attacks. That is the big fear, isn't it, that the new leadership will carry out revenge attacks on their enemies?
So I think what Asher said is very true in the sense that they're looking to, first of all, be off the sanctions list. And in order to do so, not only are they welcoming back the Syrian refugees from all over the world, but they also need to sound and seem moderate. Also, I think there is a fatigue amidst the people in general, and perhaps even amidst the fighters themselves, from war. I mean, they've been at it for so many years, and people are really flabbergasted at what they had to endure during the Assad regime. And in order to put things in place and to get those, let's say, constitutions and institutions as well in place, and in order to get that money into Syria, as Asher had said, I think that they're doing a pretty good job in seeming to be very moderate. Why do I say that? Because radical Islam has proved itself to not be able to change, because inherently, ideologically, deep down, it is impossible to accept a non-religious entity.
It's a worldview, isn't it?
It's a worldview, and it's a deeply ingrained worldview.
Okay, all right. Thank you both for now. Well, the IDF has confirmed that it has now achieved complete air superiority over Syria. The Israeli Air Force has bombed hundreds of targets in Syria in recent days, destroying chemical weapons stockpiles and conventional military as well. It does also continue to hold on to that buffer zone with Syria in the Golan Heights, and we can go up there now, where we find our correspondent, Robert Swift. So, Rob, is the IDF planning any further operations in Syria at this stage?
So several hours ago, it appeared that the IDF was once again conducting airstrikes. No comment on this from the IDF themselves, but sources within Syria have said that there was airstrikes conducted against a former army helicopter base to the southwest of Damascus. Now, this comes as the IDF has said that it has achieved complete air superiority over Syria due to the fact that it has conducted so much damage against the air defense systems as well as other military assets in Syria. The IDF saying that in the last few days it's destroyed up to 90% of the Syrian air defense. And this comes as there are briefings in the Israeli media suggesting that Israeli military commanders may be looking to leverage this situation in order to make an attack against Iranian nuclear facilities. Now, at the minute, it appears that these discussions are in a planning phase, but there are key changes in the Middle East in the last few days which possibly make that more likely. Now, not least of all is the fact that Iran has somewhat been disarmed by the loss of so many of its proxy forces, proxies that it used as leverage against Israel in order to deter Jerusalem from conducting such an attack. Those proxies now are mostly off the table, and that opens up the way for the possibility that Iran will need to find some other form of leverage. And that is the reason that Israel and some Western countries are concerned that Iran may accelerate its move towards a nuclear weapon, making some form of Israeli intervention in that more likely.
All right, we'll keep a close eye on that. Rob, thank you very much indeed. Robert Swift up in the Golan. And just real quick, Asher Fredman, I want to ask you, because the US administration said today that there was now an opportunity to completely destroy all of Syria's chemical weapons stockpiles. Do you think the US will be looking to outsource that job to the IDF?
I think so. I think the U.S. is not looking right now to get engaged in another regional conflict, but Israel has three priorities very quickly. One is to destroy the strategic weapons in Syria and prevent them from falling into the wrong hands. The second is to keep a careful eye on an uprising in Islamist attacks or Islamist activity inspired by their success in Syria, and that could be in Iraq, that could be in Jordan, that could be in Judea and Samaria, in the West Bank. And the third is the opportunities that have now been created vis-a-vis Iran. Iran is weaker than it's ever been. Iran knows that in a Trump administration, it's likely to be facing a maximum pressure campaign. It may attempt now to break ahead towards a nuclear weapons capacity. That doesn't mean that Israel is really intending to carry out the strikes, but Iran is more vulnerable than it ever has been.
All right, OK. Well, let's go back to Syria, because the US-backed Kurdish-led Syrian Defence Forces, or SDF, have come under significant pressure from Turkish-backed forces, and Turkey continues to occupy large swathes of Syrian territory, purportedly to fight what it calls terrorist groups. Well, today the SDF raised the Syrian opposition flag in some of the areas under its control, while a senior SDF general warned Europe that their capacities to contain ISIS were being reduced. Well, we can go now to Qamishli in northeastern Syria. We're joined by Osama Mohammed, a journalist there. Osama, thank you for joining us. So first of all, it seems the SDF has lost control of Deir ez-Zor. Does it continue to lose more territory to the FSA, the Turkish-backed forces?
Thank you for having me. Well, actually, for the Turkish-backed forces, they didn't control Deir ez-Zor. They were controlling Manbij, actually. And this was after 2 weeks of fighting, using Turkish drones and heavy weapons by the Turkish-backed forces. However, for Deir ez-Zor, it has been almost handed to the HTS after SDF take over it when the regime of Syria was withdrawing from Deir ez-Zor. The statement of SDF was that we didn't want ISIS control any areas of the western Euphrates River, so we went there to protect the area and secure it from any appearance of ISIS. And now, after the area have been settled down with the pressure of the local community in Deir ez-Zor, they left it and hand over it to HTS. However, for Manbij, there was a big fighting happening there. A lot of people have been killed. Now there is a lot of violence happening actually inside the city.
People have been killed, civilians or fighters?
There is killing of civilians. There is a lot of videos on social media now. This group is not under the HTS, and they are thieving, stealing, and doing killing on identity against the Kurds in Manbij. So Manbij already gone. These pro-Turkish forces and backed by Turkey actually are now in the main brigade on the Euphrates River between Kobani and Manbij. And now there was a statement by the SDF General Command that there is a ceasefire now between them and what's called a Syrian National Army. Now there is going to be a ceasefire for 4 days until the end of Monday, to give a chance for the fighters, for the civilians, for the Kurds who want to leave Manbij, to withdraw from it and go to Kobani city.
Okay, and how is the SDF fighting back? Is it getting any assistance at all from the United States?
There is no any support from SDF. According to some resources that I could get, that there was some kind of official request from the SDF to the Israelis to support them against these radical groups in Manbij and in the other places. But I think until now there is no any answer from the Israeli for SDF too.
Osama Mohammed, great to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed, Osama Mohammed there. And a quick word from you, Ruth. The SDF were America's allies. They defeated ISIS. Have they now been abandoned?
Well, it remains to be seen because, first of all, the Turks have been concocting this revolution in Syria, partly in order to repress the Kurds, in order for a similar press for autonomy in Turkey not to happen, as well as in other places. That's number one. Second of all, and very importantly, I think it's very significant to understand the role of Turkey in general in Syria. Wanting to take a stronghold of Syria in practice is not only related to the Kurds, but also to having the possibility of energy corridors that would surpass the elevated position of the Islamic Republic of Iran. So to create alternative routes for streamlining energy towards Europe and being in the center of that, the magnet of that, and in actual fact becoming again, perhaps not the Ottoman Empire, but the greater Turkey, that's what is standing behind the Turkish let's say, resolution.
The head of the Sunni Muslim world, essentially.
Precisely. And that puts the Kurds in a very precarious position, even more so than before, for allies like the United States as well.
OK, thank you, Ruth. While Syrians continue to discover the extent of the wealth that was amassed by the Assad regime over decades, some of the former rebels say they've just discovered an immense underground tunnel in the Damascus countryside. Our Middle East correspondent Ariel Osseran has the detail. Ariel, what did they find?
Yeah, Laura, it appears they found what is the tip of the iceberg of a massive underground complex under the Kalamun Mountains. It's northeast of the capital, Damascus, not too far from it. And in the footage that the rebels shared, this is really a massive tunnel. In terms of how advanced it is, this is unlike any other underground tunnel we've seen from Israel's enemies. Nothing compared to the Hamas tunnels, even the Hezbollah tunnels. And in this video by the rebels, they're advancing. You see it's wide enough for more than 2 trucks side by side. And they say that some of the abandoned trucks that are there are portable missile launchers. Now, they turn to each other in the video and they say, you wondered where all the people's money went? Here, this is where it went. Now, in addition to the fact that, you know, the IDF saying today that it destroyed 90% of Syria's air defense or ground-to-air missiles, basically it's air defense systems. This could potentially be the remaining factor of what the Syrian army had left behind. But really, if we are comparing this to what Hezbollah showcased just a few months ago, a complex they called Imad 4, similar tunnel system that through which they transferred these strategic missiles that are aimed at Israel. This is a lot more advanced than that. But it does make you wonder, you know, Hezbollah, IRGC, Iranian proxy, it's not unfathomable, or it's pretty, you know, clear to assume that the Iranians also helped the Syrians build these tunnels. It makes you wonder what tunnel systems Iran has hidden, not only its nuclear sites, but also its strategic weapons aimed at Israel. This is, there are already some indications that this sprawling underground network in Syria is how Iran transferred its advanced weapons to Hezbollah via Syria. This area in Syria isn't too far from the Damascus International Airport, an airport that Israel has struck. It has not confirmed that it has struck, but over the years it has to prevent weapons transfers to Hezbollah via Syria. And this is another example as to once you take Hezbollah or Syria out of the equation, remove them from the link of the axis of Iran, that it now limits Hezbollah's ability to rearm and regroup moving forward.
It's incredible, Ariel. Thank you very much. Ariel Osseran there. Ashraf Rehman, just a quick word from you then. It is remarkable, the arsenal that Syria, the Assad regime, managed to build up with the help of Hezbollah, Iran and Russia, of course.
Syria was a key ally of Iran, of Russia, a key element of both those countries' strategies to project dominance in the region towards the Mediterranean. And indeed, they supported, in fact, the only reason Assad was able to survive for so long was because of Russian and Iranian support. His fall was too quick to hide most of the evidence. But I think a lot of the money is in bank accounts in his and his wife's name, probably in Qatar and other countries around the world. But yes, of course, we're discovering the extent to which those countries supported Assad's military buildup.
And Ruth, are you worried that Iran might race towards going nuclear now? It is so much under threat. It's got nothing left to lose, really.
I'm worried about two things. First of all, with its back to the wall, it will race to get nuclear power, because it needs to sort of gain face again after losing it, losing the Assad regime, losing the Hezbollah, losing the Hamas, and so on. However, I don't think they've just given up just yet. And what I'm also worried about is that they are negotiating currently with the rebels. Let's not erase what they think they can still do. And despite the tension and despite the animosity, offer to buy the possibility of continuing to transfer weapons via those exact tunnels we just saw.
Ruth, Asha, thank you both. We're going to take a short break. When we come back, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has told top Biden envoy Jake Sullivan that Israel will do whatever it takes to protect itself from Syria. More on that next.
Started on October 7th, but for many, the horror may never end. With homes destroyed, families displaced, hostages missing, soldiers fallen, and a country traumatized. In the first year alone, more than 17,000 Israelis have been wounded, and hundreds of thousands have experienced psychological trauma and need support now. Thankfully, for 112 years, Hadassah hospitals have been on the ground healing. At our expanding Gandel Rehabilitation Center, we're providing critical physical therapy and life-changing mental health services.
Hadassah is a great place.
Today I'm really thankful.
Now, some are back home, living their lives, but many more still need our help. Help your family and friends heal at Hadassah hospitals. Give today.
You live in Israel or you are preparing for your Aliyah? Congratulations. You have a smartphone? Perfect. Download the Olim app for free and discover everything we have to offer. Booking medical and administrative appointments, bills paying, debt verification, instant translation, contractor recommendation, request tracking, and much more. And if you can't manage it on your own, our team speaks your language and assists you with all your procedures in Israel, starting from 199 shekels per month, unlimited and for the whole family. Don't hesitate any longer. Download the app or contact us.
Welcome back. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is meeting US diplomatic envoy Jake Sullivan in Jerusalem tonight, and Netanyahu has told him Israel will do whatever it takes to protect the country from any threat emanating from Syria. The two also discussed the war in Gaza and hopes of a deal to free the 100 hostages who are still being held there. Well, this amid reports the head of the Mossad met with Qatar's Prime Minister in Doha earlier this week. Well, our Baleh Sladin is covering those talks for us now, and he joins us now. So, Baleh, once again, we've got reports of a hostage deal circulating, but what is different this time around?
Yes, that's exactly what Jake Sullivan was asked in his briefing today, in his press conference. And what he said is that actually after the ceasefire agreement between Israel and Lebanon, then Hamas changed posture. At least he said they adopted their posture after the ceasefire agreement with Lebanon, meaning that Hamas was hoping for Hezbollah to save them for their actions after October 7th, and apparently that didn't happen. Also, their hopes that Iran will get involved in this conflict, something that is obviously now will not happen. And of course, the recent situation in Syria, where the Assad regime has collapsed, and Iran and the proxies and the axis of resistance, or the so-called axis of resistance, now need to cut their losses. And apparently Hamas is reconsidering the situation again, and that's why we've heard today from the Wall Street Journal that Hamas is dropping their demands of a full Israeli withdrawal from the Gaza Strip, and also the Israeli declaration of the end of the war prior to any hostage deal or any truce. And now that the way is more, or it looks like that the way is more, it's looked like that it's possible that we'll reach that hostage deal. A source in Israel said today that was present actually in the meeting between Jake Sullivan and the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, that the meeting was a success, although that he refused to actually elaborate about the possibility of reaching a hostage deal. But if we add up all the things that we're hearing in the reports, and also the fact that the head of the Mossad was in Doha, Qatar yesterday, meaning that lots of things are happening in the background, and that's why we're seeing this positive atmosphere, let's call it. This is happening while here behind me in half an hour there will be a small demonstration for the families of the hostages in order to support the Biden administration and the incoming also Trump administration to continue their pressure, as they are saying, on the Israeli government and also on Hamas, of course, to reach a hostage deal in order to see the loved ones back to Israel, something that we all hope, of course, that will happen soon. Again, in the background, lots of things are happening apparently.
Baleh, thank you very much indeed. Baleh Sladin there were with me in the studio. Asher Fredman and Ruth Wasserman-Lund, both from the Misgab Institute for Strategic Affairs. Thank you for staying on. So, Ruth, as Baleh was reporting there are a lot of things going on in the background. We have had these reports so many times before. Still 6 weeks to go before President Trump is sworn in. Are you hopeful of something moving in the next few weeks?
I'm hopeful. Very difficult to say that, because I take into account that the families are hanging on every word that is being said about this issue. Horrific, inhumane situation in which people are being held completely against all international norms in captivity. And funnily enough, the world is not yelling on the top of their voices about this injustice. How hopeful am I? I'm not a little bit distrustful of the Hamas. They have not moved, in my humble opinion, since their wish to remain in the position that the entire IDF needs to move out of the Gaza Strip.
You don't believe those
the
reports that they've dropped that demand?
They have not dropped that demand.
Withdrawal.
In fact, they've declared that they have not dropped that demand, and that's why we are talking about a partial deal. And only when the entire IDF will withdraw, the rest of the hostages will be released. And this is very dangerous, because one needs to trust the Hamas in order to have that partial deal. Very, very difficult to leave anyone behind and have only part of the hostages back.
All right, Asha.
I agree with my colleague Ruth's analysis. Hamas is obviously under a lot of pressure. The success of the IDF military operation, the threats from President Trump, from the incoming administration. They may be, let's be clear, if Israel were to withdraw from the Gaza Strip today, It may be worth it, it may not be worth it, but Hamas would retake the Gaza Strip within a short amount of time. Now, the devil's always going to be in the details. Israel may be willing to pause for 30 days, for 60 days, whatever is being talked about, and Hamas may hope that that will allow it to survive. And if that allows a number of the hostages to be released, that's obviously horrible and tragic for those who are left behind, but it is an incredible blessing and joy for those who are released.
Young men, for example, would
the elderly, the sick, the American citizens. But we should be clear that if, in the framework of a deal, Israel leaves the Philadelphia corridor, within short order, Hamas will be able to rearm. And whatever you call it, a technocratic government, a PA government, whoever is officially in charge of Gaza, once Israel withdraws, it is likely that Hamas will be able to once again become the dominant force on the ground. And therefore, I think we're going to see Israel insist that it retains the right, like in Lebanon, to continue targeting Hamas terrorists and any attempts by Hamas to rearm and reestablish itself.
Okay, thank you both.
I think if we may demand something that the international arena, and particularly the new administration, and this is my biggest hope, would do, is to put their foot down, exactly like incoming President Trump had said, and to make it very clear, because they do have leverages with Qatar, get all the hostages, not partly, out. He can do that. It is a possibility.
All hell will rain down, as he said.
Exactly. Let's see that hell raining down.
And we've not yet seen the Americans putting real pressure on Qatar, which is a huge...
At all, not
absolutely.
even a little bit. And the leadership of the Hamas are still held and sitting very comfortably in Qatar, despite all the declarations.
Okay, thank you both. A 12-year-old boy was shot dead in Jerusalem last night, and several other people were wounded after a Palestinian gunman opened fire at a civilian bus. Doctors were unable to save Yehoshua Aharon Tuvia Simcha. His killer turned himself in this morning. Our Jody Notilovitz has this report.
A terror attack on an Israeli bus in the West Bank killed one child and injured 3 other people. The IDF noted in a statement that the gunman shot up the bus near the Palestinian town of Al-Qadr. A spokesperson for the Hadassah Medical Center, where the victims were being treated, initially stated that the 12-year-old and 2 adults were receiving emergency care in the trauma unit, both of whom were in stable and mild conditions. Later, announcing the child's death and identifying him as Yehoshua Simcha from Beitar Illit, which is where the bus had traveled from. The IDF statement added that the area of Bethlehem had been surrounded in pursuit of the assailant, who then turned himself in Thursday morning. He was named as Ez al-Din Malu from the town of Beit Awa near Hebron. This attack followed a car ramming in the southern West Bank over the weekend that left a soldier critically wounded, and the shooting of 3 Israelis the night before in the Palestinian city of Nablus.
And Asha, we have seen terrorist attacks like this soar over the past 12 months, haven't we?
We have. As Hamas is growing weaker in Gaza, it is also looking to increase its strength and its influence in the West Bank. Also, as we head towards a battle over succession once Abu Mazen is no longer the leader. We see Hamas positioning itself. We see Iran, who's been weakened in Gaza and Syria and Lebanon, also looking to increase its influence in Jordan, in the West Bank, in Judea and Samaria. We also have to recall that the PA, the Palestinian Authority, continues to incite and pay salaries to terrorists, and this despicable terrorist who murdered this 12-year-old boy can look forward to a Palestinian Authority salary for the rest of his life.
Yeah, another failure of the US to put pressure.
Well, this
perhaps.
is exactly the attempts and the success of the Islamic Republic of Iran. It needs to save face. It has Jordan, which is a weak, relatively weak leadership, as well as the West Bank, which is a complete chaos. And what it's been doing for years is basically smuggling weapons via Jordan into the West Bank to strengthen Hamas and undermine Abu Mazen. And the fighting that we see between the two, the Hamas and the Fatah, this is the Islamic Republic of Iran in the West Bank.
Ruth, Asha, Misgav Institute's finest, thank you very much to you both. Great to have your analysis. Thank you.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Well, as Turkey extends its influence in Syria, Ankara is also extending its reach in the Horn of Africa. President Erdogan says he has secured a deal to end a feud between Ethiopia and Somalia, and that would put an end to Somaliland's aspirations for statehood. Take a listen.
As a result of the trust that Somalia and Ethiopia have in our country, we have reached a new stage in the Ankara process that we started approximately 8 months ago. By overcoming resentments and misunderstandings, we have taken the first step towards a new beginning based on peace and cooperation between Somalia and Ethiopia.
Well, for more on that, let's go to Istanbul. We're joined by journalist Ayla-Jean Yakli. Good to see you, Ayla-Jean. So, I mean, this caps a phenomenal week, first of all, for President Erdogan, doesn't it? He's had this stunning victory in Syria, and now this in the Horn of Africa.
Yes, that's true. And the Turkish officials were quick to point out that it was trust in Turkey and its particular brand of diplomacy that is built, as according to the foreign minister in a statement today, one that's built on consensus and hearing both sides out, helped reach this deal. So Turkey is very much showing that it can still be, it is a player beyond its own borders.
How significant is Turkey's existing interest in the Horn of Africa?
You know, like other countries, this is a poor, unstable part of the world, but it's also strategically important. And Turkey has been present in the Horn of Africa for some time now. It supplied weapons, drones, namely, to Ethiopia in its fight during the recent civil war. And it's also been in Mogadishu, both its military, it has a vast aid network there as well. So this is a part of the world that Turkey is very much interested in, and other powers are as well.
And Egypt has chosen to side with Somalia in this feud. What does that mean, Ayla-Jean, for Turkey's relationship with Turkey? Because, of course, Egypt is very much involved in this. It's sent troops, it's sent assets to Somalia. Is that bearing on Erdogan's calculations at all?
Turkey has had good relations with both Ethiopia and Somalia, and I'm sure that especially at this particular juncture, with developments in across the region, he doesn't want to antagonize Egypt. I mean, that was a hard-fought repair to a very fractured relationship, and because Turkey is kind of walking this middle way, is more of a neutral neutral broker in this process. I'm sure that in his calculations, this won't necessarily antagonize Egypt.
Ayla-Jean, great to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Well, staying with Egypt, millions of school children there are from now on studying from school books that have had all anti-Semitic references removed. The new books also refer for the first time to the historic presence of the Jews in Egypt. Peace activists have consistently pointed to anti-Semitic school books as part of the problem. The conflict is never solved between Arabs and Jews. Well, Saudi Arabia and the UAE made similar moves recently. Joining us now, Marcus Sheff is the CEO of the Institute for Monitoring Peace and Cultural Tolerance in School Education, or Impact SE. Thank you very much for being with us, Marcus. Good to see you again. So what brought about this initiative then in Egypt?
Well, this initiative in Egypt is a long-running affair. They had a plan which was to reform the textbooks from between the years 2016 until 2018, until 2030. And this plan has kept pace. So now we are at the point where 80% of school children in Egypt, and this is the most populous Arab country in the world. This is a country with something like 25 million children in school. Now, the majority of those are in elementary school, and those textbooks so far have been reformed. And so quite an important reform. I think we can all agree. Egypt is of great strategic importance in the region. It's of great strategic importance to Israel. And imagine that these children are now learning entirely different things about Jews, about Israel, and other peace and tolerance ideas than they learned previously.
Made similar moves recently.
I'm sorry, I didn't quite hear that. Could you repeat that
Yeah,
question?
sure. Is there any evidence, Marcus, that this pays off? Because, as I said, the Saudis, the Emiratis, they made similar moves. Are we seeing any change at all?
Yeah, listen, I think we are certainly seeing change in the region. We're seeing change in the attitudes of Emiratis. We are going to see change moving forward. Textbooks are uniquely authoritative. They carry the values, they carry the identities which nation states wish to pass down to the next generation. And outside of Israel, in the Middle East, you have one book, one grade, one subject. So that makes them even more authoritative, does it not? And imagine that society of the future in Egypt. Imagine that society in 5, 6, 7 years' time, when children educated at school become young adults, become members of society, and they have been taught entirely different ideas than their parents. They have no longer been taught anti-Semitic ideas. They have no longer been taught ideas about Israel, which are extraordinarily problematic, considering that Israel and Egypt have had a long-standing peace treaty. So, I think these changes that we are going to see in the region, we're going to see at a faster pace than people might imagine. As I said, 6, 7, 8 years after those school curricula in change, we can expect to see societies which are more open, more tolerant to Jews, to others as well. There are minorities who reside in these countries, and attitudes to them are more tolerant as well. So this is all round a very good thing.
Marcus, thank you. Great to talk to you. Marcus Sheff there at Impact SE.
Always a pleasure. Thanks so much.
Thank you. World football is cementing its place in the Arab world. Saudi Arabia has won the rights to host the FIFA World Cup in 2034. It follows, of course, in Qatar's footsteps, which hosted the tournament in 2022. Uri Levy is a sports journalist and the founder of Baba Goal. Great to see you, Uri. It's been a long time. Why did the Saudis manage to pull it off then?
Why? I like the first phrase you started this segment. World football is cementing its place in the Arab world. I think what we are seeing in the past 20 years is a shift of power in hosting not only football events but sports events in a very similar way to what we've seen in Europe, maybe in the 15th, 14th, 16th centuries, when all the great artists were playing their music and drawing their art in the yards of rulers of Europe back then, where the big patrons were living. Now the big patrons of sports, of trend culture, are sitting in the Middle East. So thinking that it might sound weird that the second World Cup in the Middle East is coming in basically 12 years' time, but 12 years including Qatar World Cup in 2022, of course, but it's basically some kind of a force majeure. Nobody in world sports can compete with the resources,
quite. Is it just a question of
the abilities
money?
of the Gulf countries?
Is it just a question of money then? The European
yes, eventually
countries.
Saudi Arabia was the only nation that submitted a bid to host this World Cup, which will be an historical one. First World Cup of 48 teams being hosted only by one country. It's going to be hosted in 5 cities, 15 different stadiums, and Saudi Arabia is going through a massive renovation process in the next decade, building the stadiums, building the touristic facilities and infrastructure, improving the railways, improving the internal flight services. It's going to change this country forever. And I think that everything is prepared and ready to be the crown jewel in Mohammed bin Salman big plan of the 2030 vision, that in some way, when we see the turmoil in the region and the great shifts that are happening daily in this past year and a little bit more, maybe it's part of this process that Saudi will become the center of the Middle East, but more than the Middle East, a center for world activity in culture, in sports, in tourism. And the World Cup in 2034 should be the symbol of this process.
And we're likely to see all the same criticisms that we saw prior to 2022, human rights, of also who is going to be building these stadiums, and we're going to be worried about their concerns, but also that Saudi Arabia doesn't have a huge footballing culture, does it? That's what they used to say about Qatar. That is slowly changing, though, isn't it?
I wouldn't agree. I think that
Saudi kids play football.
Yes, indeed. Saudi kids and also Saudi girls. Haven't you know that Saudi is the most growing nation in women football in the world? There are, in the past few years, around 70,000 girls all over the country are being listed in the Saudi Football Federation, playing football from very young ages. They are investing in it, in women football specifically, and men football and kids football. Saudi is a football mad nation, is not at all comparative to Qatar, which is, has its place in world football after what it's done in 2022 and the World Cup and everything, and the Aspire Academy that helped to develop a lot of athletes throughout the years. But Saudi is a different animal, is a sleeping giant. Anyone who watches Middle East now, I think in the past 3 years, remember how many times we spoke about the Riyadh Derby, the Jeddah Derby, the big teams, Al Hilal, Al Nasser, Al Ittihad Jeddah, Al Ahly Jeddah, teams with millions of fans, and anyone who were present on ground on Qatar World Cup saw the passion of the Saudi fans that could take their car and drive to the stadium to watch their team winning in Argentina, for example. They were like practically the hosting nation in Qatar because there were so many and so passionate.
And just real quick, is it going to be in the summer or is it going to be in the winter again?
It's likely to be in the winter, but not like Qatar in November, December, due to Ramadan that will be in those dates. Probably will take place in January, February. So
of
there are
2034.
there were still some dates to close, but it will have a massive impact on world football schedule. And obviously, as you said, there will be a lot of criticism from the massive clubs of Europe, from the European federations, and obviously the media.
Well, it will be exciting to watch. Uri, thank you very much indeed. Uri,
thank you, Laura.
Now, nearly 2 weeks of relative quiet on the border with Lebanon, and that means that some of the Israelis who had to flee their homes amid Hezbollah attacks have begun to return home. Our Robert Swift has this report.
Our journey through the Western Galilee begins in Rosh HaNikra, where until recently an outdoor gym served as a machine gun position overlooking the sea. Much of this area was all but abandoned by civilians for the last 14 months. We travel through the town of Shlomi, where more than a week into the ceasefire, many businesses are still shuttered. While the streets are quiet, signs of normalcy are returning. Vegetation at the side of the road trimmed for the first time in over a year. In Hanita, the next community eastwards, the entrance remains closed to outsiders. Many of the villages on the border are keeping up wartime security. In Eilon, not far from the border, we meet resident Dalia. She and her husband returned, keen to maintain their artist's garden. But her adult children, who lived here at the outbreak of the war, are yet to come back.
It's too early to know what will happen. Impossible during the first week of the ceasefire. So far, it's quiet.
Dalia's concern is for the future of Eilon. While her generation will return, she fears younger families with children enrolled in schools won't come back until the end of the school year, in June, if they come back at all.
It was clear to us that we'd be coming back. Not so clear if our children would return, our children and grandchildren. It will be a problem if lots of the families with small children don't return. I would want to see a kindergarten and a school full of children.
On we travel to Shtula, one of the worst-hit communities during the fighting. Its elevated position on the border leaving it vulnerable to anti-tank missiles. The wall, erected to block the missile's path, is decorated in murals, including one depicting an Ashkenazi and a Kurdish Jew, a nod to the village's founding communities. Avirama Harris, a local tour guide, acknowledges concerns for the rural community's population size, but remained optimistic.
Reason says that some people will not come back and then there will be a deterioration in the number of people here. But what we see is that in the south, where they had a catastrophe, some people are actually moving to the south now. And Israel is not rational, it's not a rational place. There's a lot of, I don't want to say miracles, but irrationality around.
Perhaps a hint of this, people from different parts of Israel arriving to Shtula out of curiosity, hoping to see for themselves the state of the village. Some even apparently inquiring about property. Our guide around Shtula is Itzhak, a member of the local security team.
So this road that we're on right now, what we're doing, we couldn't have done this 2-3 weeks ago before the ceasefire.
Until the ceasefire, this was a totally closed area. We never passed here. It was forbidden. You can see, as we drive the state of the road, we didn't drive here at all. Because it's exposed to the border here, they fired all the anti-tank missiles. Almost every house was fired upon. All the houses behind us and above, they were hit.
Going back home in the north. Well, that brings us to the end of tonight's show. Thanks for watching. Do stay with us on I24 News. Nicole Zedek is up next with the rundown from me and the team. Thanks for watching and good night.
Want to stay on top of the news no matter where you are?
Introducing I24 News' brand new news website.
On our website, you'll find all the latest articles, interviews, and live broadcasts. Everything you need to know right at your fingertips, whenever you want it.
So what are you waiting for? Download the I24 News app today.
The Rundown on I-24 News. I'm Nicole Zedek. Thanks for joining us this evening. Tonight, we are bringing you an exclusive look inside Syria, just days after the historic collapse of Bashar al-Assad's regime. Our correspondent, Zach Anders, went to Damascus, the only reporter from an Israeli channel to independently enter Syria. He filmed the momentous occasion of citizens finding out for the first time the decades-long Assad regime is over. This is footage you will only find on I-24 News. We're going to speak to Zach Anders about this experience later in the broadcast. But first, here's a glimpse at some of the people he spoke to.
The thing that is very incredible that all people are very, very happy. In any time of the year, people are happy. For me, it's a very heart beating to be in this area and see all the people who are happy. I have been waiting for a moment like this for all of my life. Most of people's problems in Syria is Bashar al-Assad, nothing else.
I'm free. This is how I feel. I'm free. I'm literally free now. Bashar al-Assad is now out of Syria and will never come. And I want him dead, like every single Syrian in this world. Because we have suffered, and this man must die. Because he went to kill us here in Syria. Every single man in Syria have suffered his rage. So we need him killed right away. Please let this message be with all the Syrian people in here. Let the Syrian live, please.
What's next for Syria? What happens next?
Syria is going to be a great nation. We hope that, and we need it to be. We need the democracy. Let the American be with us.
In a major move, the Israeli Air Force says it's achieved total air superiority over the skies of Syria. This is monumental, as it gives Israel the ability to fly directly over Damascus if and when carrying out strikes on Iranian-linked targets in the capital. There's now also no fear of surveillance drones being shot down by Russian-made air defense systems, as the IAF destroyed 86% of former Assad regime's air defense systems across the country. Now, this also lays the groundwork for potential strikes against Iran's nuclear facilities, with a new report claiming Israel believes there's a new opportunity to strike Iran's nuclear sites. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken was in Jordan today to talk about Syria, laying out what Washington hopes to see for Syria's political transition. The United States has said it will recognize a future Syrian government as long as it's a credible, inclusive, and non-sectarian governing body. Blinken already had talks with Jordan's King Abdullah and is heading to Turkey for further discussions. Here's what the U.S. Secretary of State had to say.
Also critical to unlocking international recognition, international support that Syria very much needs after decades of dictatorship, conflict, corruption, isolation. We also want to make sure that we're doing everything possible to support those people, those organizations that are working to find the thousands of disappeared people, children, women and men, during the Assad regime. That includes, of course, the American journalist Austin Tice. We're determined to find him and bring him home to his family and loved ones.
An American citizen was just freed from a Syrian detention center. Travis Timmerman crossed into Syria from Lebanon on a Christian pilgrimage and spent the past 7 months in detention. Although Timmerman says he heard other young men being tortured while detained, he himself was not badly mistreated. Now, some people who originally saw videos of Timmerman on social media thought he was American journalist Austin Tice, who went missing in Syria 12 years ago. The search for Tice is still underway, but his family is incredibly hopeful he'll finally return home. In Lebanon, the IDF says troops have withdrawn from the southern Lebanese town of Khiam, following rules of the ceasefire agreement with Hezbollah. Israeli troops are still deployed in other areas south of the Litani River, continuing to operate against any threats. The IDF has until late January to withdraw from all areas of southern Lebanon. CENTCOM commentator Michael Kurilla, he visited Beirut yesterday to monitor this withdrawal and ensure the Lebanese armed forces are replacing Israeli troops in line with the agreement. And another U.S. official is in Israel today. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan met with Prime Minister Netanyahu in what's likely the Biden administration's final push for a hostage release deal and ceasefire in Gaza. Sullivan will also travel to Qatar and Egypt, the main Arab mediators in ongoing negotiations. Earlier tonight, Sullivan told the press he sees a new willingness from both Israel and Hamas to make a deal happen.
The Israeli government has indicated, including the Prime Minister, they would like to see this done. We see movement from Hamas. We see commitment from the mediators. And I will go to Doha and Cairo to try to ensure the final impetus is there to bring this all together. We've been close before and haven't gotten there, so I can't make any promises or predictions to you. But I wouldn't be here today if I thought this thing was just waiting till after January 20th. I am here today because I believe every day matters, and we're going to use every day we have to try to close the deal as soon as we possibly can.
When it comes to a hostage release deal, Hamas has reportedly dropped a key demand and would allow Israeli troops to stay in Gaza for a temporary time during the truce. This all according to a Wall Street Journal report citing Arab mediators. Now, if you remember, the main sticking point up until now has been Hamas's demand for a permanent end to the war and full withdrawal of Israeli troops from Gaza. But in the meantime, Israeli forces are still carrying out strikes throughout the Gaza Strip. The latest strikes targeting two groups of terrorists planning to seize humanitarian aid trucks in southern Gaza. The IDF says this is an ongoing problem, with aid convoys regularly attacked by Hamas terrorists, as well as known crime families in Gaza. Now, overnight, a 12-year-old boy was killed in a terror shooting attack on a bus to Jerusalem. 3 others were injured, and after a massive manhunt in the area, the suspect finally surrendered. Our Jody Natelovitz has the details.
A terror attack on an Israeli bus in the West Bank killed 1 child and injured 3 other people. The IDF noted in a statement that the gunman shot up the bus near the Palestinian town of Al-Qadr. A spokesperson for the Hadassah Medical Center, where the victims were being treated, initially stated that the 12-year-old and 2 adults were receiving emergency care in the trauma unit, both of whom were in stable and mild conditions. Later, announcing the child's death and identifying him as Yehoshua Simha from Beitar Illit, which is where the bus had traveled from. The IDF statement added that the area of Bethlehem had been surrounded in pursuit of the assailant, who then turned himself in Thursday morning. He was named as Ez al-Din Malu from the town of Beit Awa near Hebron. This attack followed a car ramming in the southern West Bank over the weekend that left a soldier critically wounded, and the shooting of 3 Israelis the night before in the Palestinian city of Nablus.
Now, the Paraguayan embassy in Jerusalem is officially open today, becoming the 6th country to formally recognize Jerusalem as the official capital of Israel. Prime Minister Netanyahu thanked President Santiago Peña for this major move and said, quote, "Jerusalem will always be the undivided capital of Israel." And for the second time, U.S. President-elect Donald Trump is once again Time Magazine's Person of the Year. In a statement, the magazine said, quote, "For marshaling a comeback of historic proportions, for driving a once-in-a-generation political realignment, for reshaping the American presidency and altering America's role in the world, Donald Trump is Time's 2024 Person of the Year." The editor-in-chief added, Trump is someone who, for better or for worse, had the most influence on the news this year. Now, let's take a deeper look at some of those top stories. For more on these headlines, I am joined in studio now by Colonel in Reserves Grisha Yakubovich, former head of the Civilian Department of COGAT, the Coordination of Government Activities in the Territories. Grisha, thank you for being with us in studio. as well as our I-24 News correspondent Zach Anders, who himself just returned from Syria mere hours ago, coming straight to the I-24 News studio. Zach, we are so happy to have you back here with us, and I want to begin with you because the footage that we have been seeing coming out of there is so much to unpack, but I want your perspective. I know there's so much you can share, but is there any moment from your reporting on the ground that really spoke to you and you can give us an image of what's happening in Syria right now?
We had a car breakdown. Literally, a CV axle popped right out. I don't think I've ever seen one dismembered quite like that in a real old beat-up car. And so we're stuck outside of Assad's palace, his former palace, that the rebels are now not letting anyone come into. It's not where Jelani is staying. We've kind of pieced together, but they're not letting anybody come in because people were just destroying it, looting it, wrecking it. So we're stuck outside of Assad's palace. We're in that neighborhood that's kind of like the Crown Heights, if you will, or just like the area where the bureaucrats lived. It was the untouchables area. And so we're broken down on the side of the road. A bunch of men come out to try and see if they can help. CV axle's completely out. There's no way you're going to be able to pop it back in. And so we're waiting, trying to figure out what to do next. And one of the men that comes out says, I was in Assad's army, and I was in his army 2 weeks ago before I defected, before I left. And I immediately felt like this is going to be a moment where I think it's going to be actually dangerous. I don't know why he said that, because the guys that I am with are Free Syrian Army guys, and we just came up from the south, from Dara, and they, for the last 10 years, have been fighting Assad's forces. They're they're telling me that their brothers are dead and killed. They're leaving young children orphaned, and this is going to be a moment. They're going to go at it. I mean, we're seeing the images. It's not all rosy all over the country. Men are getting lynched for being loyal to Assad. But in that moment, the man that I was with shakes his hand, kisses him on the cheek, gives him a hug, and we're all brothers now. And no matter what, as they were talking, and I later got it translated for me, they were saying that no matter what happens, the fact that we are here in this moment, we have a free Syria, we're going to need to work together, we're going to need to be one another's brothers again, and create a Syria for all of us, whether or not you fought for Assad. It would be different, right, if this was a man in leadership. But this is a soldier that was paid more, probably 3-4 times more than what anyone would be making in the South, given a stipend for housing or sometimes given their own apartment. They had to do, at least for the Free Syrian Army guys, as they described it to me, those soldiers had to do what they had to do to take care of their families, to protect their families, so they wouldn't end up in those prisons like we see at Sednaya. They wouldn't end up disappeared. That was Assad's dictatorship. That was Assad that did that, and forcing brothers to fight brothers. So in that moment, I thought this was a real moment of clarity, that there will be an opportunity here for a Syria and the Syrian people to create something for themselves that they really, and these are some of the images from Sednaya prison right now.
Wow.
I've never seen anything like it. It was awful.
And this aftermath of those images truly do speak for themselves. But what you're talking about, these two different Syrian civilians coming together in the aftermath of such a historic collapse.
Two soldiers from two different armies, essentially. Yeah.
And right now in this no man's land, really, I mean, I'm curious about your own safety and the safety of the Syrian civilians right now, how they feel, because in this transition period, waiting for whoever might come into power next, likely being the leader of maybe the HTS, perhaps, like you said, it's up to the Syrian.
Absolutely, yeah.
It's up to the Syrian people, though, and they have this moment in time. But is it a safe period right now, in your perspective, because it is still so chaotic?
Syria has not been safe. It has not been a safe country. So to gauge where it is today versus where it was is very hard, because 2 weeks ago, if you were to, with the men that I was with, if we were to drive into Damascus, the men that I was with had not been to Damascus in years. And if we were to go through that checkpoint, the Assad loyalist soldiers at the checkpoint at the entrance of Damascus probably would have either arrested them or killed them on the spot. Wow. And that's what we see happen time and time again. People were not going to Damascus. I was with one of the young men who had not been to Damascus in his entire life. We were tourists together. He's a Syrian, and we were tourists together in this city, and he was more amazed than I was, seeing the sights of the city. The situation on the ground, though, I mean, the security, did you feel safe? I felt safe all the time. I don't feel safe anytime when I'm walking around a bunch of guys with guns and I don't have a gun
You're used to being in a war zone, we might add.
Sure, yeah, but you know, it's not a comfortable feeling. But at the same time, 10 days ago, you had a brutal dictatorship and regime that was oppressing every aspect of their lives. Their lives were hell. Their economies shot to bits. I mean, we were looking at 5,000 pound Syrian notes that was worth less than $2 American. And they have giant rolls of these. So their lives have immediately improved at the fall of Assad. They can move around freely. They're more able to do business with one another. They're able to communicate. Some of the restrictions that were on their internet, they couldn't get on WhatsApp. They couldn't get on Facebook. They couldn't, all of those things that the internet was restricting their lives, they're now gone. They have opened up so many doors overnight. So safety is one thing, but to them, their lives have improved dramatically in the span of hours, and they're not going back. They're not going to allow for
to monitor exactly how they move forward with this change. And Grisha, I'll be coming to you in just a moment to hear the Israeli perspective of how Israel might impact exactly what is happening in Syria. But first, let's get a live update from northern Israel. Our correspondent Robert Swift joins us now. Robert, I want to talk about just Israel's ongoing military operations now, along with the buffer zone between Israel and Syria. This is where we're seeing more troops operating, but also the Air Force doing some historic moves inside Syria itself. What's the latest developments?
Yeah, it is the Israeli Air Force that seems to be leading the operations in Syria. This information not coming from the IDF, but rather from the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, a local monitoring group which says that there was airstrikes to the southwest of Damascus earlier today. During the hours of daylight, they attributed these to Israeli attacks and said that this was an attack on a helicopter base there in the area around Damascus. Now, this takes place as the sort of the rush to try and stabilize Syria, or to try and find some sort of positivity out of the chaos that is unfolding there continues. And one sign of that is the first international delegation to arrive to Syria since the fall of the Assad regime took place today, with a delegation from Turkey and Qatar, of the foreign minister, as well as security officials taking place there, and having discussions with the new heads of the transitional Syrian regime. Now, this obviously a key part of this is the fact that Turkey is right on the doorstep of Syria, is poised to be potentially the most influential country in Syria's future, in the foreseeable future. It's worth noting that Turkey not only backs the Syrian National Army, a Turkish proxy, but also has connections and has supplied arms to HTS. So it is likely that this is that this is Turkey attempting to get its influence on Syria as Syria looks to its future.
A lot of moves happening in Syria right now. Robert Swift in northern Israel, thanks so much for that update on the ground. Now, coming back here in studio, Grisha, 86% of Syria's air defense systems wiped out, destroyed. This is giving Israel opportunities they never had the capabilities of before, flying surveillance drones over Damascus without the fear of being shot down. What does this really mean for Israel's security?
First of all, the most important weapons that were destroyed are the SA-17 and SA-22 batteries. They are the most dangerous anti-air, I would say, missiles that Israel succeeded to destroy. I think almost 90% of them. And the second asset that was destroyed, an asset to us, okay, it's a lose to them, is the Sukhoi and MiG aircrafts that were also the 86%. Well, if we will conclude it, 60% of the abilities, of the Air Force abilities of the Assad regime military were actually destroyed. There is still more to do. Israel has one concern, and the concern is security. Since 1974, this buffer zone, according to this ceasefire agreement that was made by Israel and the mediators with Syria, I think that what Israel did is very smart, is grabbing this buffer zone as fast as possible to make sure, or to wait, I would say to wait. It's not to conquer. It's not to add another piece of land to Israel, but it's to gain abilities that Israel will be able to protect itself from the unknown future in Syria, because it's really unknown. And we need to ask ourselves a question. Now, I've heard what Zach said. Well, it's an amazing experience. The difference between us, Zach, is that I am a little bit older. And I remember when we implemented Oslo in Gaza as a young officer, and the same people who hated me, who wanted to kill me, who led the Intifada, were the ones who demonstrated, not demonstrated, but actually walked with us in the streets of Gaza with olive branches, calling for peace, hugging us. It's like suddenly love in the air. You know, I think that the song "Love in the Air" was actually somebody wrote it there. So I would not take it for granted, okay? This environment that you share with us, that this is amazing, okay? I would love to be in your shoes. But I think it is a temporary situation, because we need to ask ourselves a very important question. El-Julani, or what he presents, is he the liberator of Syria, or he is the radical jihadist that learned a lesson from the past, from the fathers that established the organization that he was part of, like Abdallah Azzam, the founder of modern jihad. By the way, a Palestinian sheikh that was born in a village near Jenin, that immigrated to Afghanistan, and he is the one that eventually created this creation with bin Laden of Al-Qaeda. And he is one of his students.
But al-Julani is trying to distance himself from his Al-Qaeda past, or
so let me quote a guy that I pay a lot of respect to him. His name is Mus'ab Hassan, the Green Prince. That he, I think he published it yesterday, and he said the following: a new Islamic empire was born. Do not support it. There will be consequences to that. It is the new generation of the smarter jihadist. So, again, I'm not here to compete or to say that you're wrong. This is what you actually brought to the studio, and it's amazing. But I believe, from my experience, that we see and we hear what the other side wants us to see and to hear for now. And we need to be very careful. This is why Israel did with the IDF.
And with these operations that Israel has conducted, we've seen so much of this international backlash. No backlash from the HTS, from al-Julani, from the Syrians themselves for these moves that Israel is making and claiming responsibility for as well. And so I'm still curious, as then from the HTS perspective and the Syrian perspective, are they focused on their own internal issues, or is this just a facade?
Well, it looks like it's coordinated. Simple as it is, okay? Now, the two countries that jumped immediately into Syria are Turkey. The Minister of Foreign Affairs is there. I think today he reached there to pray in the Umayyi Mosque in Damascus. It's, you know, it brings me back to history, okay? The Ottoman Empire, this is how it looks like, to me at least, okay? And Qatar. It's the two countries actually that were against Assad. Assad went back.
What are you proposing? What do you propose?
Yeah, what would be the solution if not the HTS? Because there's this new reign of Islamists.
I'm not proposing. I'm just saying, let's see. We are talking about 27 groups. The majority of them are.
The civil war is not over either. It's going to rage.
It will not be over, unfortunately. Okay, as it looks like already demonstrations in the north against them, and the Kurds and the PKK and the interest. We need to wait, okay, and to see how it will end, or where is it going to. Now, what do you expect from Julani? To start another war with Israel? That Israel will be the one that will also smash him? He prefers to pay this price. And I'm sure that somebody told him, sit tight, Israel needs to do, has to do what they have to do, and you be focused in your goals. This is why Qatar and Turkey ran so fast to Syria, because everybody knows that the opportunity, the economical opportunity now lays in Syria. We are talking about billions of dollars. Now, what do you think? Why do you think suddenly Hamas and Page accepts a deal in Gaza? They understand that they are losing the money.
What do you mean by billions of dollars? Because right now the Syrian economy is in shambles, and this is an opportunity for them to rebuild their economy, perhaps.
So let me tell you one thing from things that I did in the past. Okay, 7 cement factories used to supply cement to Israel. Now, the sanctions implemented by Erdogan against Israel, those 7 factories are not supplying the cement. They need to find markets. Where is the market? The market is Syria. We are talking about billions of dollars of investment that Qatar will spend the money, the factories in Turkey will invest their abilities, and the economical situation will be improved in Turkey and in Syria. And this is an example only for cement, okay? One thing. Now we are talking about hundreds of factories, of industry, that if you connect the new Syria, the Sunni Syria, not the Alawi Syria, with Turkey, okay, Sunni Turkey, reaching or moving together to a vision that it will not be Iran that will have this influence in the Middle East, but it will be Turkey, actually, well, it works. It fits.
If we're talking about evil in the Middle East, evil was defeated. Assad was an evil man, an evil dictatorship, and his fall and demise is good for the people of the Middle East and good for the humanity here. And it gives, if anything, it gives an opportunity for some new creation. And I think as you look around the Middle East, there are opportunities for Israel to create friendship in new places, and that's what we see happening.
I hope.
And that's the message that we are going to end on. We're going out for a quick break now here on The Rundown, but Zach Anders, thank you for bringing us this report live from the field. Grisha, you're going to be staying with me in studio. For everyone watching, we're going out for a quick break, but stay with us on The Rundown.
It started on October 7th, but for many, the horror may never end. With homes destroyed, families displaced, hostages missing, soldiers fallen, and a country traumatized. In the first year alone, more than 17,000 Israelis have been wounded, and hundreds of thousands have experienced psychological trauma and need support now. Thankfully, for 112 years, Hadassah hospitals have been on the ground healing. At our expanding Gandel Rehabilitation Center, we're providing critical physical therapy and life-changing mental health services.
Hadassah is a great place.
Today I'm really thankful.
Now, some are back home, living their lives, but many more still need our help. Help your family and friends heal at Hadassah hospitals. Give today.
You live in Israel or you are preparing for your Aliyah? Congratulations. You have a smartphone? Perfect. Download the Olim app for free and discover everything we have to offer. Booking medical and administrative appointments, bills paying, debt verification, instant translation, contractor recommendation, request tracking, and much more. And if you can't manage it on your own, our team speaks your language and assists you with all your procedures in Israel, starting from 199 shekels per month, unlimited and for the whole family. Don't hesitate any longer. Download the app or contact us.
Herzlich willkommen. Immerhin.
back to the rundown here on I-24 News. Now, there's quite a bit of talk surrounding progress on a hostage release deal and ceasefire in Gaza, with U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan in the region to push those negotiations with Israel, Egypt, and Qatar. Well, for more, let's go live now to our I-24 News correspondent, Balir Skladin in Tel Aviv. Balir, it's great to have you back with us. These talks progressing, it's being talked about as really the final push coming from the Biden administration, Hamas even caving on some key points. What are we hearing from Sullivan's visit, and what are the details you can tell us?
Yes, definitely. Just before we mention what we have about the Sullivan meeting and visit in general, just let's take a look about the situation here, where in front of the U.S. Embassy, a number of people, I would say 100 and more people, are gathering in order to call for Sullivan and the Biden administration in general to put pressure on the Israeli government and, of course, on Hamas and continue the effort to release the hostages, as we see Israeli flags as well as American flags, and, of course, lots of signs calling for sealing a deal, a ceasefire deal. I should say also that there is a lot of anti-government sentiment here in this protest as well, and we've heard a statement from the families of the hostages saying that we don't expect a lot from a terrorist organization, as they're calling it, Hamas, but we expect more, and of course from our government, the Israeli government, to bring back the civilians that were kidnapped on October 7th. That's regarding what is happening here and the protest. But what we are getting also today, a source that was present actually inside the meeting between the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, and Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor of the U.S., told us at I-24 News that it was actually a very good meeting. There are no more disagreements between us, so the Israelis and the Americans. We think alike on all the key issues, primarily on the hostages, Lebanon and Syria. This is, of course, a very positive thing to hear for the families of the hostages, and in regards to all the other reports that we're getting about the possibility of reaching a deal, especially the one from the Wall Street Journal saying today that Hamas dropped their demands for a full Israeli withdrawal from the Gaza Strip, something that, of course, was a red line for the Israeli government and for the Israeli state in general. That's something that, of course, could get us closer to reaching a deal. Jake Sullivan, when he was asked also about the change, or why are we now talking about the positive atmosphere, he said specifically that after the ceasefire agreement between Israel and Lebanon, Hamas knows right now that they are alone, that there is no more actors or non-state actors like Hezbollah or states like Iran that would help them to actually win this war and declare victory, and they should now cut their losses as he is stating it. Now we should just need to wait and see whether that is really in the coming days or maybe weeks we are getting more closer to reaching that deal, and maybe the hostages could be back to their families here, just like these people are demanding.
It seems like there could be some progress there as we're looking at those reports. Balir Skladin, thanks for that update live from Tel Aviv. Now, still with me in studio, I have Colonel in Reserves Grisha Yakubovich, as well as joining us now our I-24 News Middle East correspondent Ariel Osaran. Grisha, I want to begin with you. This progress for a deal. It's these reports that Hamas is caving on some of the sticking points that they had held firmly to for really the past 14 months, or I guess since the last ceasefire deal in November. And so right now, do you think that there is the time for this to come to fruition under the Biden administration? We're talking about just a little bit more than 5 weeks until Trump comes in on January 20th.
Well, I cannot promise that it will be implemented or happen at the end of the Biden administration. I do understand the changes. Yesterday I explained it to somebody. It's taken from the theory of chaos, the butterfly effect. A butterfly moves the wings, and somewhere in the atmosphere it creates a tornado. This is the same thing that happened when Sinwar started or opened or launched the attack on October 7th. And this tornado actually is hitting back the same ones who started it. It's Hamas, Page, it's the Shia is Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Iranian regime or the plan is being smashed by this effect. And I believe, or my understanding is that Hamas and Page finally understand that the only way that they will be able to exist or to be part of the Palestinian politics in the future is the day after. And the day after is really dependent on Qatar and Turkey and their money. The money from Qatar and Turkey, as we understand now, are directed to Syria because it's bigger, it's closer to Europe. Gaza is nothing. Okay, they will make more money, or they will make billions only from that, politically and economically. And Hamas don't want to lose this train. This is why we see now this progress. I believe it's another part of the puzzle that pushed Hamas to accept maybe the beginning of a deal or maybe the whole deal. It depends. If you take Minister Katz, the Minister of Defense, words yesterday that there is a chance for a whole deal, all for all, or what is discussed from this morning that probably a beginning of something. Let's not forget the four conditions that Hamas presented on the table from the beginning of the war, or after, I would say, the last deal. 1, to put an end to the war. 2, to withdraw from Gaza, release the prisoners, and Gaza reconstruction. They understand that Gaza will not be reconstructed if they will not reach the deal right now, because they will lose the money. Prisoners, they will need houses to settle them. And they also understand, after, I would say, the Prime Minister's being stubborn, that Israel will not withdraw for the time being from the Gaza Strip until Israel will ensure that Hamas will have no ability to rearm itself like they did from the Philadelphia corridor. And I think that the proof to that is what Israel did in Syria by holding this security perimeter inside a different country that nobody believed that it would be ever done.
Well, and speaking of a different security barrier as well, I want to talk about Lebanon and the ceasefire that we have seen. While shaky in the beginning, it seems in the past week all eyes have been on Syria, and we haven't really heard much news coming out of Lebanon, except for the news today that some IDF troops have withdrawn from one of these southern Lebanese towns. Ariel, how does the news in Syria impact the ceasefire that we have between Israel and Hezbollah that is supposed to end, in 60 days from when it was first signed?
Right. So we'll start with the developments on the ground. Yesterday, the IDF announcing in the morning that the forces have completed their mission in the southern Lebanese town of El Khiam, one of the major strongholds of Hezbollah in the communities adjacent to the border. Coinciding with Israeli forces withdrawing from the town, UNIFIL forces, the UN peacekeeping force, as well as the Lebanese military, entered the town and are establishing foothold. They're even taking out some left behind remnants of munitions, and they're exploding that. That is one of the main concerns of the Lebanese army as they dismantle Hezbollah military sites. So we're seeing that they are progressing. In fact, also yesterday the head of CENTCOM visited Lebanon, General Kurilla, to kind of help facilitate the establishment of this peacekeeping mechanism to ensure that any violation will have an address that Israel can voice its claims towards before it takes unilateral steps. Now, how does the situation in Syria fit into all this? Basically, once Syria is removed from the Iranian axis, it prevents Hezbollah from being able to regroup, rearm itself, and Syria was the main transfer hub of weapons from Iran, the land route for Iran, Iraq, Syria, and then Lebanon, but also from the air. We've reported multiple times over the past few years of Israeli airstrikes in the Damascus airport, the Aleppo airport. Now Iran does not have the same foothold, if at all, in Syria at the moment, and so they are not able to regroup and rearm themselves. And so once you remove that capability from the equation, they're moving forward, they need to reassess and recalibrate their position, because if they had hoped that they would be able to, okay, let's take a temporary ceasefire and then afterwards we'll go back to rebuilding our stockpile, now that is no longer an option. Reality hit Hezbollah in the face with what is going on now in Syria. And this is also affecting the reality on the ground in terms of their attempts to reestablish their positions. Before the fall of Syria, we saw Hezbollah operatives going back to their sites, Israel striking. Since the fall of Syria, we're not really seeing the same amount of Israeli airstrikes during this ceasefire on Hezbollah violations of the ceasefire.
So right now we're talking about Iran losing Lebanon, Gaza, Syria, and now there's these reports, Grisha, that Israel is laying the groundwork and eyeing the possibility that now could be the time to strike Iran's nuclear capabilities and nuclear facilities. What do we know about this? And is this really a crucial time for Israel to take advantage of all of the, you talk about the butterfly effect, all of the different things that they've put into motion over the past several weeks?
Well, it's complicated a little bit.
Everything in the Middle East is.
I know. And I think that we need to simplify the complexities. Let's enter to the shoes of Iran, okay? It's not that they lost their abilities with Hezbollah in Syria. It's also Iraq. The last day that something was launched from Iraq was November 24th. You can count it. So since then, no drones, no rockets launched from Iraq. Can we say that Iraq is also not part of this axis? Well, I don't know. Let's see. Let's wait. Now, the problem is the message. The message to Iranian proxies. You sacrificed, as Iran, Hamas, the first ones, because they are Arabs and Sunnis. And now you sacrificed Hezbollah. Yes, they are Shias, but they are also Arabs and they are not Persians. And now they sacrificed Syria. It's Alawis, okay? And maybe the next sacrifice will be Iraq, or it's something that will be forced on them. So what about the Houthis? We are talking about 600,000 armed Houthis with dresses and sandals ready to march to Israel. Will they do that now, knowing that their patron will not back them? So we need to see that. I'm not surprised why there are briefings in Israel threatening Iran, or maybe wanting them to listen or to hear that you are next. Because with knowing that it is psychological warfare from our side this time.
Wow.
And maybe it will push them to do some mistakes, or it will push them to do the next dangerous thing. And it's the threat from the east and from the south. What do I mean by that? If I would be Iran and I would enter to the shoes, I will try and enter to Jordan to see that Jordan will not. I'm not surprised why Blinken flew to Jordan, the first country. This is the first country he visited. It's to make sure, or he sent a message. We as the West will stay with Jordan to back them, so the Eastern Front will not be open. And two, it was just published half an hour ago that a senior Egyptian senior said that Sisi asked from Israel help to be able to deal with the consequences of what happened in Syria. And they are afraid that the same thing will happen to the Sisi's regime in Egypt. So actually it opens two future strategical arenas that we need to make sure that they will be secured by our allies this time. This is the United States and the Western countries.
We are looking at a new picture in the Middle East, it seems for sure, and how all of these puzzle pieces might play into each other, that remains unseen. But gentlemen, Colonel in Reserves Grisha Yakubovich and our I-24 News Middle East correspondent Ariel Osaran, thanks for unpacking these latest developments in the region as always. Now, with all of these latest developments here in the Middle East, our I-24 News senior U.S. correspondent Mike Wagenheim, he sat down with the deputy U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, Robert Wood. Here's a quick look at that interview.
Well, those divisions have certainly been stark over the last year when it comes to the Israel-Hamas war itself. I mean, how difficult has it been for the U.S. to be so isolated on the issue of the Israel-Hamas war at the Council, seemingly taking fire from all sides?
Well, look, our support for Israel is ironclad, and that comes across, of course, in our public statements, but also in closed consultations. And there are countries that try to take advantage of the situation. We have said for a long time the best way to get a ceasefire in Gaza is to make sure that we have a resolution that addresses not only the ceasefire, but hostage release. And there's some countries on the Council that don't like that particular framework. We have insisted. That's why we unfortunately had to veto the last resolution on this issue because of attempts by some to delink the hostage release from a ceasefire. And I think it's just patient diplomacy is the only way we're going to get to a resolution of the situation in Gaza. But I think you do have to maintain a strong position, not only diplomatically but militarily, to send a message to those who would like to see the entire Middle East unravel that, no, we're not going to let this happen. And in the Council, it has been very challenging, but we have held to our position for quite some time. We've tried to look for ways to join resolutions, but at the end of the day, particularly on Gaza, we have to have a condemnation of Hamas. There are members of the Council who refuse categorically to condemn what Hamas did on October 7, 2023. So, and we made very clear to a number of countries, there is no way we are going to support a resolution that is going to delink the ceasefire from the hostage release.
Now, a new documentary is exploring the complex relationship of shared humanity, culture, and connection between Israelis and Palestinians. It's called The Other and was filmed from 2017 up until this year, 2024, and even includes now scenes from post-October 7th and the ensuing war. But instead of focusing solely on the violence, The Other showcases another reality, an entire ecosystem of peace builders and activists in Israel and the West Bank working together towards a better future. Well, to talk more about this award-winning documentary, I'm joined by the filmmaker herself, Joy Sella. Joy, thank you so much for being with us on The Rundown today.
Thank you so much for having me.
I want us to just talk about your vision in creating this first. I'm sure it has changed so much since you even began filming in 2017. So much has happened since then, but what sparked your decision to go out on this journey in the first place?
Yeah, so I'm Israeli, American, Jewish upbringing, and spending a lot of my time in childhood coming to Israel and really versed in living and being the Jewish and Israeli narrative and culture. And I was not aware of the other people living, our neighbors or as part of within Israel and the Palestinian territories. And I started to want to delve into that understanding myself. And so I just brought the camera with me, and from there it kind of evolved and mushroomed into this much larger exploration.
Wow. And so when you speak about that, from 2017, it's never been a calm time here in the Middle East or in Israel, but specifically in 2024. I understand your project actually wrapped up filming, but you decided to add a new chapter, I guess, so to speak, after October 7th and the war. And so tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so we actually premiered in spring, and we were set to premiere at an Israeli film festival in New York right after October 7th. Of course, that got canceled, and we then premiered in spring and had a very successful festival run in spring. We won Best Documentary twice, once in Europe and once in the U.S. and Boston. And we, throughout that tour, and I actually toured with Israeli-Palestinian peace activists as well as performers and musicians, and something we would hear time and time again is people are asking, well, what about now? And we wanted to make sure that the credibility of the message and this heroic work that all these people in the film are doing is still really understood and acknowledged, and we wanted to make sure that it wouldn't be dismissed after so much loss and trauma of October 7th and ongoing. So we thought we have a responsibility to revisit these characters and hear from them now. Of course, so much has changed, for the worst, and it's a much difficult situation now, but a lot of these people in the film feel that now is the time when it's difficult that they must stand true to their message. And to my surprise, no one wanted to pull their footage post-October 7th. And we have a lot of people in this film.
Wow.
One of the peace activists, Ahmed Halou, who actually is featured in the trailer that we're playing right now, has since lost 60 family members in Gaza and still holds true to his message of peace and activism for everyone on this land. And a new voice we feature is actually Maoz Inon, whose parents were murdered on October 7th and has since really expanded and rooted down into his peace activism as well.
It's amazing that they can use this horrific tragedy to continue to be a voice for peace in the region. I think especially following October 7th, that's why so many people said that there is reason for peace now more than ever, because you see the damage that can be done without this peace. And so speaking to the people that you have spoken to in these voices, what is their vision for a new region in Israel or the peace process, and how do they make that happen?
I'm not sure if we're posing solutions in the film, and I all I know is that something that we hear time and time again is whatever the solution may be, is that we have to humanize each other, and then we can move forward, because I'll quote Suleiman Khatib, one of the activists from the film, is the other alternative is a program of destruction and death. So we really have no choice, and we have to see what else we can do together. And I think when it's difficult is when we need it the most. And of course, you'll have the most criticism at that time. But what is the alternative? To not have hope and to not try to make a better future here?
And what's the reaction after playing at some of these major film festivals, winning these awards? What is the reaction from people who have gone out and taken the time to watch your documentary?
Yeah, surprisingly. So I had a lot of concerns, and I guess I made peace with the fact that I thought we'd face a lot of backlash in the West. And maybe that's still coming. I mean, as we progress on the journey getting the film out, that's definitely a possibility, but I was very surprised at how warm the audience reception was at our festival run. Prior to Jewish festivals, when we were in more mainstream audience, it made me feel that people are ready to humanize and have a message of hope, even while acknowledging devastation and a difficult reality. So that was that made me feel very optimistic. Something very surprising was that Jewish, American, and Israelis in the diaspora, as well as Palestinians in the diaspora, were seeing this film and having a very positive and engaging and healing experience with it. And I thought for certain that that would be where I would receive the most backlash. And I think that feedback meant the most to me.
And I think that is one of the most important things that we see lacking in today's dialogue or lack of dialogue. And that's why you see, especially in the West, in the United States, on many of these college campuses, let's say, it's the lack of conversation between Ethan, pro-Palestinian and pro-Israeli people having a conversation. And the message of your film is stating that there should be room for both of these voices if there's ever going to be any hope for peace. And so how have you opened the conversation for something like this?
Yeah, so we're focused on programming. We want to take this to universities. We are touring with activists that are featured in the film so that they can share their message. Oftentimes in the West, we see people are speaking for the people here. And I think to see the people that have suffered the ultimate loss and are actually living this reality, wanting to find a better solution and work together is an important message that people in the West need. It's kind of a wake-up call. And I think it's important we hear directly from them. So that's what we aim to do.
Certainly. And Joy, you also have a small connection to I-24 News yourself. One of our cameramen, Gil Kramer, he actually helped work on this documentary with you.
Yes. He is a dear friend, and I'm so happy that we get to bring this up. So I actually met, how I got connected to Gil was actually, I brought one of our main subjects from the film, Osama, a peace activist, a Palestinian from the West Bank. I brought him to Kibbutz Be'eri, actually, back in 2019 when they were doing, it's called The Lighthouse, and they were basically doing like this peace activity in honor of Gaza. And you could see Gaza from this space, and these were peace builders that actually lived in Kibbutz Be'eri. And I brought him there, and we filmed there, and I-24 was there. So I asked I-24 for someone that could do drone footage for the film, and they connected with Gil. But the fact that I-24 was part of this connection, that we were actually at Kibbutz Be'eri years ago, and we actually had activists from the West Bank there with us, meeting with Israelis and connecting in that way, I think was a very interesting connection.
Certainly, and I'm so happy we could be a small part in making this vision come through. Quickly, Joy, if anyone wants to watch, how can they watch the documentary The Other?
So right now we are working on distribution. We have a festival coming up in January in New York, and we have one more screening in Tel Aviv with Standing Together on December 18th. You can look it up on their website. We're going to be announcing there. And if you are interested in seeing updates about the film and where we can be seen, you can go to our website. I think I gave it to you guys, but if not, it's weuncoverfilms.com/theother.
Okay, fantastic. Joy Sella, thank you so much for joining us on The Rundown and talking about this. Sounds like a powerful documentary that I certainly want to watch myself, especially considering everything happening in the region right now. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Now, that's all we have for you on this latest edition of The Rundown. You can always head to i24news.tv for more updates on these developing stories. For now, I'm Nicole Zedek, and thanks so much for tuning in.
Made for me.
Shalom. ¿Qué me trae por aquí? La necesidad impostergable de 600 millones de hispanoparlantes que ahora necesitan escuchar el mensaje judío e israelí en tiempos difíciles. ¿Cómo lograrlo? Cuento con ustedes para continuar llevando a lo más alto del mundo mediático una inquebrantable diplomacia pública al servicio de la verdad sin concesión alguna.
Welcome to the I-24 News National Security Podcast, in partnership with INSS, the Institute for National Security Studies. I'm your host, Nicole Zedek. Each week, we are bringing you in-depth discussions with expert analysts on some of the most pressing national security challenges facing Israel today. So, let's get started. Nowadays, in the year 2024, wars are no longer fought only on the battlefield. The fight for public opinion has become one of the most critical aspects of modern-day conflicts, and Israel is regularly in the global spotlight, facing relentless disinformation campaigns meant to delegitimize the Jewish state. But the question is, who is behind these campaigns? Well, today's episode looks at the sophisticated and sometimes costly strategies used by Israel's adversaries, like Iran and Qatar, to spread this anti-Israel narrative. We'll examine and critique Israel's responses and discuss what needs to change to make sure Israel can reclaim control over its global narrative. For a small country that's a leader in technology and innovation, why is Israel still struggling to win the battle for public opinion? To answer these questions and much more, I am joined in studio by Attila Somfalvi, an expert on issues of influence and consciousness, strategic and political consultant, as well as the Fake Land podcast anchor at the Institute for National Security Studies. Attila, thank you for being with us on the podcast today.
Thank you, for having me here.
Let's begin by just setting the stage when it comes to this battle for public opinion. It is always a challenge, specifically for Israel, and specifically we see this increased criticism during times of war or military conflict. And so just break down exactly this battle that we're seeing play out around the world.
Yeah, well, it's a battle about public opinion, for the public opinion, against the public opinion, with the politicians, against the politicians. It's always on the table. Israel has a very strong narrative regarding the adversaries, the enemies, those who are around us and surround us and attack us mostly. But it is not able to take it for a long time and leave it on the table as a necessary tool to convince people all over the world that Israel has the right to exist, Israel has the right to respond, Israel has the right to attack, and so Israel has the right to defend its own civilians. And that's a problem. And you ask yourself why. I mean, it's you know, in a very realistic way, you can understand that Israel shouldn't explain that much, right? We have this word in Hebrew, hasbara. Hasbara meaning explaining. And when you use the word hasbara, you are explaining. It means that you are defensive. You're not in a position that you can attack or even go forward with your case. So Israel always has to explain itself. Yeah, well, I was attacked. I need to respond. Well, my civilians were butchered, cooked, killed, burned down, and raped, so I have to do something. And even after 7th of October, Israel was not able to be consistent and to keep its case strong for a long while.
It's always on the defensive.
Always on the defensive.
Especially nowadays when it comes to the fast-paced social media environment. This is where we're really seeing this disinformation against Israel and Israel's challenge to keep up with the ever-changing, constantly different narrative that's on social media right now. And so how does that play into also against Israel's capabilities?
Well, we are losing. It's a matter of numbers, you know. It's the huge numbers. There are 7 million Jews in Israel, right? You have 7 million Jews in America. 1 more million spread all around the world, and then you have billions of Muslims, right? Mostly pro-Palestinians, mostly anti-Israeli, even anti-Semitic, and you have also Christians that are not, you know, big Israel fans. So even in a matter of numbers, we are losing this battle. And you were asking before, how come Startup Nation didn't come up with some ideas to struggle?
Such a powerful nation for such a small population of people.
We are powerful, but we are outnumbered. So that's one. Second, the state, as a formation of ministries and so on, is not leading a diplomatic policy, a public policy that should guide, right, those people dealing with public policy, what to do and what to say. There's nobody leading this battle, this struggle, this war. Nobody. You can't find a minister that it's his job. We had this Galit Distal Atbalian minister lady. She was in charge with Hezbollah, where she quit. A few weeks into the war, she quit her post, right? And her ministry was closed down. It means that nobody takes responsibility for what Israel is doing. Nobody takes responsibility for, getting people into this business of responding, being on the net, spreading information all around.
It's a difficult job at that. When you talk about not only the ministers, we've had, especially in the beginning of this war, a spokesperson for the state of Israel, Eylon Levy. Everyone knows this face and everyone knows this name around the world. However, a few months into the war, after doing this job, which is a very difficult job at that, he was let go from his job.
He was fired because of political reasons. And Eylon Levy is so talented, so well equipped with what we need, good English, good performance. He knows how to deal with a camera. He knows everything. And he was kicked out just because somebody thought he's not on the right side of the political aisle. So yes, Israel is not in the game. Let's put it on the table. We are not really going to battle those millions of people who are retweeting, reposting, sharing, using TikTok and Instagram and Twitter and Facebook and all those platforms that became very influential in the world. Like, just look at the figures, right? Most of the young people in the States, the Z generation, Gen Z, they take their news from TikTok, right? It means that somebody has to feed the TikTok with information, with shorts, with 1 minute, movies or whatever. Somebody has to cut this. Somebody has to edit it. Somebody has to put it up. And then also we have another problem. We have the algorithm that is against us. Those are facts already that were researched well. And we know that it takes only a few minutes for a kid to open a new account on TikTok and to get anti-Semitic or anti-Israeli material without looking for it or even without searching for it.
And these are the real people. Another problem is all of the bots that are spreading this disinformation. So many of the different percentages that you see when it comes to this anti-Israel comments, at least on social media, these are not even real people commenting them. So who is behind this part of this anti-Israel narrative?
State players. You have Iran, you have Qatar, you have the Russians, of course. You have, you had, I don't know what is happening right now with Hezbollah. Hamas is very strong in this field of disinformation and perception. They really work on influence actions and activities. We saw them. The Islamic Jihad has a movement that is spreading out lies and disinformation and is trying, just to polarize Israeli society. They are very deep into it. In Iran, they invest millions of dollars every year, many millions of dollars. The Russians are experts. The disinformatia, it comes from the Russians. Stalin invented during the entire Cold War. They're out there to try and dismantle and delegitimize and destabilize the Western societies in NATO and so on. So they are far ahead of us with the will, with the power, with the money invested in it, and with the people that work in it 24/7. We are doing nothing. We have just a few public. You mentioned Eylon Levy, who's, as I said, is very talented, and he's the star of Fakeland this week. By the way,
amazing.
Him and Gadi Ezra, who was the chief of at the Prime Minister's office, was the manager of the Hasbara office. So during Bennett, so Eylon Levy said, I was kicked out. I'm not getting a salary from the state, of course, but I do keep on going as a private person. So he has an organization. He founded something of himself because he wants to go on. Who is paying for this?
What we continue to see. It's more of this
Donations.
grassroots movement from many of the Jewish community, from the Israeli citizens, but not from the Israeli government itself.
No. Too little, too late, by the way, because we had, like, just for example, at the beginning of the war, you had thousands of people enrolling to help and to spread out and to fight disinformation on the net, right? You saw hundreds of Israelis, thousands of Israelis on the net all the time, spreading, sharing, resharing, and so on. You saw that. They disappeared, most of them. 90% of them disappeared after 2 weeks or 3 weeks because they went back to their lives. In November, December, they went back. And then you had a small group of people that continued. They were eager to help. And so they got some donations from here and some donations from the American communities and this and the federation, but that's begging for money. Israel should have come and said, okay, you are the best, I want to keep you up front and I'll pay you, I'll give you some money for 1 year, whatever. It didn't happen. So you had thousands of people, and now we have tens of people. That's what we still have out there.
Take that then when it comes to funding compared to Qatar's funding. Yeah. We're talking more than $1 billion donated just to United States universities.
Exactly.
This is the big problem that also people don't understand, how this indirectly or directly influences the Gen Z, these college university students that we're seeing then take over the streets of these campuses in these pro-Palestinian, anti-Israel marches. And so Qatar is certainly putting the money where their mouth is.
Well, they are putting the money in what you just described, but they're also putting billions of dollars in something named Al Jazeera. Al Jazeera seems something Arabic, right? Yeah, right. But if you go in Europe, and you stay at a nice hotel, it doesn't have to be a Ritz, but you stay at a nice hotel, and you go down to have breakfast, and then you sip your coffee in the lobby. At some point, you'll turn your eyes and you'll see on the screens in the lobby Al Jazeera in English.
State-funded Qatari media.
Unbelievable. I'm not telling you a story. I saw it with my eyes. I was like, you know what Israelis do? They have this chutzpah. They take the remote and try to change the channel. I did it twice, and then I just noticed that it was blocked on Al Jazeera. Somebody is paying for that. Somebody is working in this field to maintain Al Jazeera alive in tens of hundreds of hotels in Europe, everywhere. So people are coming. They are getting their information from an anti-Israeli media outlet that is stuck on huge screens and spreading disinformation about what we know and you and I know as non-facts. What is Israel doing? Israel can do nothing about that. It took Israel months just to kick the reporters of Al Jazeera out of Israel. It took months to close them down here. It's unbelievable. They were telling Hamas and they were telling Hezbollah and they were telling all our enemies where the rockets are falling and where things are happening. They were filming. What normal country can accept this? It's unbelievable. And I respect I-24 a lot. I respect the fact that you are trying for so many years to spread the Israeli narrative in English, in French, in Arabic, but that's not enough. That's not enough, and we need to have also technological means to tackle the problem, because alone we won't be able to do that.
And there's so many issues when it does come to state-funded media. Qatar, Al Jazeera is a great example of that, but then is that a way that Israel should be combating these state-funded by having some sort of internal media policy themselves?
Nicole, we are not Qatar.
No.
And that's the good news, of course. We are not Qatar, and we don't have the deep pockets that they have, of course. Israel won't be able to pour in billions of dollars in spreading Israeli information. We are a democratic country, a free country. People can read this paper or that site or that Twitter. It doesn't matter. Al Jazeera is an influence tool. Now, we're talking about disinformation or conception or perception, whatever, consciousness. But in order to get people to get their picture as you want it to be, you have to be all the time in an influence operation that never ends. All the time. You have to have 24/7 news, so-called news, and bring the information that you want to spread around. And you have to hire a lot of people, and you have to be into it. It's a business. Actually, Qatar is a small country with huge influence in the Middle East, and not only in the Middle East. They pour in money in soccer in Europe. They buy museums. They buy. They have a very nice, I don't know, a company that flies people all over the world.
Wow.
They have everything, right? So they invest money in the States, in Europe, in the Middle East. They want to be all the time a player, and they're ready to invest. But that's because they are a dictatorship. They have a lot of money. They can do with this money whatever they want. You can't do the same. So you have to tackle the problem from different angle.
And
starting by acknowledging that you have to be, that influence is another warfare. We are not doing that.
Israel is, if you look at the facts, Israel is winning this war. Over the past 14 months, we continue to see major war gains on the battlefield. But if you look around the world, you are absolutely losing the battle of public image. And that's what this comes to. How can you have these facts on the one hand, yet this narrative on the other?
You know, on the 10th of October, I think it was the 10th of the 11th, I don't remember exactly. It was the third or the fourth day of the war. At the INSS, we had this meeting, you know, with all the experts on different fields, and everybody was, you know, analyzing what's happening in Gaza, what's happening in Lebanon, in Iran, Tehran, and so on. And I was last to speak, and I raised my hand and said, listen, I just want to tell you not to be surprised, because we are in the, in the third or the fourth day of the war, but we are losing this war, our war. They say, how come? I mean, it's only 3 days after the massacre. It was only 3 days after all the atrocities came up. Everybody saw them. Everybody's talking about them. How come we are losing? I said, listen, it's a very fast. The tide changed in a second, in a day. We had 3 days. That's what Israel objectively had. When the international press was like, wow, that was huge. I mean, that was unbelievable, and Hamas is a terrorist organization. After 3 and 4 days, when Israel started to, you know, to shoot back and to bomb and to get into Gaza, everything changed totally. On the 17th of October, 10 days after the massacres, I remind you, the New York Times, BBC, Sky News, CNN, everybody had a headline saying Israel bombarded a hospital, killing hundreds of people. And Israel said, it's not us. And all the major media outlets in the world, all of them, all those that I mentioned, they all preferred to embrace and to believe in Hamas and not Israel. How the hell can this happen 10 days after 7th of October? It's unbelievable. It just shows, and you know, I'll tell you another story. I remember I called somebody at the foreign ministry a few days after the massacre and said, listen, we want to help you at the INSS because we have this group of thinkers that we are following what's happening on the perception issues and so on. We want to help you. You need us. Can we do anything? Can we help you with information, with analyzing, whatever? Just tell us. We want to help. So somebody that I talked to, I won't mention his name, he said, oh, so we are fine. We are really fine, don't worry. This time we are fine. It's not nice to say, but everybody is really, they feel pity about us, you know. And I was like, I hang up and I said to my colleague, I said, listen, it sounds so weird. An Israeli official telling you at the foreign ministry, it's fine, we are on it. We were so not on it.
Yeah.
But we had this, it's hard to say hubris, right? It's not a hubris, of course. But you know, at the beginning it was like, yeah, Israelis, oh man, this is horrible, right? Everybody in the world was with us. And it disappeared, it vanished in less than a week.
And so the main question is, Attila, then, how should Israel be responding to this? We talked about how they are not responding, but what is the way forward, or is this battle for public image, is it already lost?
It's lost, but it's not lost. Okay, it's a little bit complex. It's lost because there are perceptions that have been built during 50 years. When you talk to somebody, a liberal editor at the New York Times, and you want to convince him that you are not a conqueror in the West Bank, that you actually are there because of security reasons. After 50 years of building settlements and taking Palestinian land and so on, I'm not saying if it's right or not, I'm saying what the narrative is. After so many years of having this narrative embraced by the liberal media in the world, the poor Palestinians and the Goliath Israelis, then it's very hard to come and say, well, we were attacked. Because after a few days, after the shock goes away, people go back to their fundamental perception about Israel and Palestinians. And when you send in F-16s, F-15s, F-35s, and then tanks, and then lasers, and then, I don't know, Iron Dome, you have all this technology, and you still say that you are the one who was attacked, it's incomprehensible at those people that I mentioned, the liberal editor at the New York Times, because he says, come on, you are there for 50 years. Now you were attacked and you are counterattacking. You are using all this American weapon. You are the strongest, you are the biggest, you have the, they shoot at you rockets, but you don't really get hurt by the rockets because you have the, and we go back to the old game. And if Israel doesn't have a policy, a real policy, saying, what's your next step? What are you going to do the day after with the Palestinians, with Gaza, with the settlements, with the West Bank? How are you going to deal with millions of Palestinians still living here, right? Nobody in the world accepts the narratives coming from the ministers here from the far right, saying that the Palestinians are going to leave, you can deport them for whatever, or expel them. So you're losing all the time because of these perceptions that are so deep, so strong, and you don't have a counterattack. Not at all. No policy to counterattack. Because the Prime Minister says, when you heard the Prime Minister saying, we had the Hamas land, right? Hamastan. We won't let the Fatah land, Fatahstan. So it means you are not really ready for concessions. I'm not blaming the Israelis or anybody for not being ready to concede anything to the Palestinians after 7th of October, right? But you need a policy. You have to be very clear. That's first.
And some sort of an answer.
Yeah, a narrative. A clear narrative about what you are going to do with those people that you fight. Not 1 year, not 5, not 10, 20, 15. You have to show the world that you have a plan to go forward and make separation between Israelis and Palestinians. And the political scene here is not ready for that. And I think the public opinion is not ready for that. But leadership means form a policy, put it on the table, and go with it. Then we can fight the other narratives. I don't need anybody to feel pity about me. I need people to respect me. The world is not respecting Israeli politicians.
There needs to be a clear policy going forward. Attila, as we're wrapping up here, as a first step, I want us to do, we've been talking just all about the importance of Israel's public image and lack of policy, as you just mentioned. I want us to do a quick little rapid fire round as we're wrapping up here. I'm going to ask you a couple of questions and just tell me the first response that comes to your mind. The first one is, can Israel win this public policy game?
Yes and no. I'm sorry that I can be more clear on that. But
it's a tricky question.
Yes, we can win if we show up with something new. No, we can't really win because we are not involved in this, and this is not the Israeli DNA, and you have to invest a lot of money, and you have to bring in so many people to work in this, and you need technology. I know that there are a few projects now, the Mossad, at the army, at the military, and so on. They're trying to find a way to use technology to fight disinformation. I don't know how far are they going, but it's not enough. Even fighting disinformation, you need to fight it with information, with true information. So yes, you can win. No, you can't because you don't have the means to do that.
Not an easy win at
not
that.
An easy
so then what is the main obstacle that is hindering Israel's image abroad?
The facts and history and perception and many years of not being clear on what you want to do with the problem, the Palestinian problem. Nobody comes here and says, wow, you and Iran, this is the big problem. No, everybody says you and the Palestinians is the big problem. This is what people tend to say, your critics say, our critics say all the time, what are you going to do with the Palestinians? That's the only question you hear from the Europeans, from the Americans, from the international community, from the UN, from all those. So okay, if you don't say what you're going to do, you can fight back. You can fight back on the front, on the war, in the war, but that's it. On the diplomatic side, you are a little bit crippled.
So then, as you already mentioned it once already, but as we're wrapping up quickly, just the one piece of advice that you would give to Israel to save its public image.
Well, I would say first we have to win. Really, win the war, the kinetic war. You have to win it. You have to be strong in the Middle East. That's the first step, because people do appreciate and respect strong states. That's the first thing. And then after you are strong on your feet back, and you control the region, you control your fate, be smart enough not to be dragged. Lead. When Israel leads, usually everybody's clapping hands. Look what happened with Rabin, with Peres, even with Olmert, with Ehud Barak, sometimes even with Netanyahu. When you lead and you are strong, then you can transform what people think about you. But if you are dragged into bad situations, the perception is not going to change. And whatever you say, it's not going to help.
So it's all about being respected and working on this policy. It sounds like, Attila Szomfalvi, there's so much we could continue to unpack when it comes to Israel's public image and the fight on this external battlefield. But I